If Jesus becomes so real to us that we're a little frightened that he might be standing beside us, then life may very well never be quite the same again. You know, it's easy enough at least, I guess, to like Jesus, to be a fan of Jesus. It's just like being a fan of anything else. You know, on Facebook, the social networking sites, you can become a fan of all sorts of things, people, groups, causes. And all you have to do is click on the little button on the screen. Personally, I'm a fan of a number of causes, some musicians, a couple of magazines. I'm even a fan of Krispy Kreme donuts. But it doesn't necessarily mean very much. I haven't sent any money to those causes. Doesn't mean I go to the concerts of those musicians. And I can't remember the last time I actually bought a Krispy Kreme donut. More often than not, being a fan is about being a spectator. And that asks not very much of it. Being a fan, being a spectator asks no more of me than I feel like giving at that time. And sometimes my relationship with Jesus is just like that. But when you run into the awesome, holy, even terrifying presence of God, the way that Simon did, it's dangerous. And people always come away from such encounters changed. The crowds that listened to Jesus when he was in that boat, they liked him. They thought he was great. Some were enthralled with him. But for the most part, they went home exactly the same people they were before. Not Simon. Simon may have been a fan before. He had met Jesus before, but suddenly things changed. Simon's first instinct is to flee. Simon knew getting too close to God was dangerous. Simon knew those stories in the Old Testament where God had showed up, and when God shows up, something happens, and it's never something the person there really wanted. And Simon's dead right. Jesus tells him from now on, you're going to be catching people. And Simon's life is never the same again. He's a disciple now. His days as a fan and a spectator are over. And I'm pretty confident that Jesus wants to speak to us in very much the same way he speaks to Simon. Jesus is not much interested in fans and spectators. Jesus calls disciples. In his new book, Donald Miller tells a story about a rather odd family from San Diego. It seems this family is sitting around one New Year's Day, and one of the kids complains about what a boring day it is, and Bob, the father, agrees that it's boring, and they conclude that in fact New Year's Day is one of the most boring days of the year, and they start to toss out ideas on how to rectify this situation. One of the kids suggests that they have their own parade, which Bob endorses quickly as being a much cheaper idea than the previous suggestion to buy a pony. And so they begin to talk about costumes and getting some balloons and having this parade. The parents start to plan a cookout that they will have after the parade, and the children go to invite friends and neighbors to the parade. But Bob thinks that, you know, it's a whole lot more fun to be in a parade than it is to watch a parade. And so on the spot he creates a rule. No one is allowed to watch this parade. And some of the neighbors are told and agree, and so they have their first parade, and they march down the street, and they convert the few spectators into marchers, and a dozen or more people enjoy a cookout after it's all over. 10 years later, this parade attracts hundreds of people. People who used to live in the neighborhood and have moved away fly back in to participate. They plan their vacations around this parade. At the most recent parade, they invited the neighborhood mailman to be the grand marshal. And he showed up in his mailman outfit, and he marched at the front of the parade throwing envelopes into the sky in order to lead the people down the street. And behind him were hundreds of people carrying signs, flags, and banners, dressed in costumes. And not a soul was sitting on the curb. After all, no one is allowed to watch. There are no spectators at this parade. All praise and glory to the God who in Christ has called each and every one of us to be marchers in the parade. Thanks be to God.